Welcome to all of you to this 8th lecture in the Urban Conversation series. As some of you may know that this was started last year and the inaugural lecture was given by Dr. Ishan Ahluwalia, and she has been guiding this series over the past 1 year now. She is not here today, she is in the US, but she has been taking a keen interest in organization of the lecture today. So these 8 lectures have covered a wide range of issues on urbanization and its challenges. It's been a bi-monthly series, and more or less regularly we have been having this every 2 months. So our next lecture will be now in July. Today we have O.P. Agarwal, and I'm thankful to him for having taken time out. He has come all the way from Mohali. So thank you very much for coming and spending time with us. And of course, Dr. Rajat Kathuria, who has been closely associated with this program. He will introduce Dr. O.P. Agarwal, and I'm thankful to ICRIER for having organized this series so far. It is the longest running series that we've had in this center, and we are really grateful to ICRIER for providing us all the arrangements in selecting topics, speakers, covering all the range of issues on urbanization. And I would now leave the field to Dr. Kathuria to introduce OP and take this program forward. And thank you all for coming, and I do hope you have a very enjoyable evening today. We'll have the lecture first by Dr. Agarwal, and then that will be followed as usual with a question answer session. Rajat.
Thank you, Mr. Kakkar, Director of the Habitat Center. And a warm welcome to Dr. O.P. Agarwal to the, as Mr. Kakkar said, the 8th conversation in this series, which has been, I think, highly successful. And ICRIER is very happy to be associated with the Habitat Center on an issue of topical interest. I don't want to stand here between you and the speaker, but just to mention that the topic is extremely important. It's contemporary. All our major cities are already grappling with congestion. And the tier 2 cities and the tier 3 cities and the peri-urban areas, as they grow, they are also going to have to grapple with issues of congestion. As an aside, congestion, given our population, congestion are really issues that we have to deal with, not only now on the streets of every city. Congestion is kind of an existential problem in India, but also on the net, on the internet, we are having to deal with congestion, and we've been reading in the newspapers recently. So congestion is all around us. So extremely contemporary, topical, and an area that requires, I think, a lot of evidence bases, which ICRIER, as I said, is very happy to be associated with this series, and I echo my warm words of gratitude to the Habitat Center for associating with ICRIER, and ICRIER vice versa associating with the Habitat Center in this extremely important series. As I said, I don't want to stand between you and Dr. O.P. Agarwal. In my email to all of you, in our email to all of you, his CV would have been circulated. You would have probably seen some of his accomplishments, some of his formidable accomplishments, if I may add. Let me just briefly mention that he's currently an executive director at the Indian School of Business, Mohali, and we were just talking about Chandigarh and its state of urban planning. From December 2009 to June 2014, he was working at the urban transport as an urban transport advisor to the World Bank, where his responsibilities were to advise urban transport projects and project teams across regions. He also chairs the Committee on Transportation in Developing Countries of the Transport Research Board in the United States. He's been a member of the Indian Administrative Service. He's held portfolios that have dealt with urban transport. He's written national urban transport policies. He's a bachelor's degree in IIT from IIT, a master's degree from IIT, and a PhD from IIT and a master's degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So you can see a formidable education background, vast experience, and eminently qualified to speak on the issue that we are dealing with today, which is dealing with congestion. So thank you, Dr. Agarwal, for agreeing to come here. The floor is now yours. You will speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer session.
Well, thanks, Rajab. Thanks, Rakesh. Privilege to be here. Pleasure. Both old friends, so when they asked whether I could speak, there was no way I could say no. Obviously, a topic that I'm very fond of. Dealing with congestion, that's what we decided I'll try and talk about. It's not a problem only in India. It's not a problem only in Delhi. I think it's a problem worldwide. There are very few cities around the world who've cracked this. So we're not in a minority of having a problem of congestion. It's pretty much across the world. But what are we really talking of? I think this is what we're really talking of. One more. And what did we try? How did we try to sort this problem out? We thought that if we build a flyover, the problem will get sorted out. Well, we built the flyovers, and this is what we got on the flyovers. And yet another example of the flyover. I also argue that it's not congestion that's the problem. Congestion is only the manifestation of a problem. There is an underlying problem. Congestion is only the manifestation of that problem. We have to identify what that underlying problem is and try to remedy that problem. This manifestation happens for different reasons in different cities. In some cities you have plenty of road but far too many vehicles. You need to control the number of vehicles in those cities. In some cities you don't have too many vehicles but you have too little road space. You need to build more road space there. In some cities, the roads are in very bad shape. You have potholes all over the place, and that leads to congestion. So you have to improve the road surface there. So the reasons vary from city to city, and unless we identify the reason specific to that city, we are probably trying to solve the wrong problem. And I keep saying that often trying to resolve congestion by just creating more road space is like a bad doctor who tries to treat you for malaria by giving you crocin. So he's only trying to reduce your fever, but what is causing that fever he is not looked at. That's, I think, the crux of what we want to try and do in dealing with congestion. Well, this is, the number of registered motor vehicles in the country has kept growing and hasn't slowed down. It's been growing faster and faster. Notwithstanding everything we've done, building flyovers and building wide roads and building the metro systems and building the BRT systems, this has continued unabated. This graph clearly shows you that. There has been a change in the kind of fleet composition, the vehicle composition. We've had a much higher share of cars and four-wheelers in the 1950s, but then motorbikes have overtaken that, and the predominant share of the vehicles that you see on most city streets are the motorbikes. So there's been a change in the composition of. Now, why is this important? This is important because, again, I keep arguing, the marginal cost of using a motorbike is less than the cost of using a bus. So if you own a motorbike, what it costs you to take the motorbike to wherever you want to go is going to be cheaper than taking a bus to go to that place. And then it's the most convenient form of transport. You can park it next to your bed, you can park it next to your office table. It's as convenient as that. And on city streets, it's probably the fastest because you can find your way through little spaces and get right to the top at any intersection. So a very convenient vehicle to use, no transshipment required, fastest on city streets, and added to that, if it's also the cheapest, then why would anyone want to move out of the motorbike? So this is really the challenge we face, and this is where this changing share of vehicles has added to the problems that we otherwise had. Okay, let me sort of this as the backdrop. What this slide is showing you is a comparison of the growth in the number of vehicles vis-a-vis the growth in the population. And the simple message to take from here is, at least in the 6 major cities in the country, the number of motor vehicles have grown 7.5 times faster than the population. 7.5 times faster than the population. So it's a much faster growth in motor vehicles than the population. It's not just the 6 major cities. If you look at a number of other smaller cities across the country between 2001 and 2011, that decade, it just shows you a sample of most cities. It has doubled. Delhi, between 2001 and 2011, the number of motor vehicles has doubled. The metro was commissioned in 2002, yet the number of motor vehicles has doubled. This is the pattern in most other cities as well. Some it has grown faster, some it has been less, but by and large it's sort of a much faster growth. That means in the last 10 years we've added as many vehicles to the city roads as we've added since the motor vehicles began. So it's a much higher pace of motorization. See, that's the reason why it's very important, very urgent that we deal with this problem. Now, coming to dealing with this problem, there are 2 myths I would like to dispel. Myth 1, widening the road eases congestion. Most people say, oh, you have so much congestion, let's build an elevated expressway, let's build an underpass, let's widen the road, let's build a... Doesn't solve the problem. Why? Why does it not solve the problem? If you've created more space, there is a latent demand which is not coming onto the road because of the congestion. That will come onto the road. And that's what's called spatial convergence. So more people use a car as additional road space becomes available. More people will now travel during the peak hour because there is capacity during the peak hour. That's the time convergence. More people who were using transit or public transport will now start using this because it's easier to use the road. So that's what's called the modal convergence. And this is the principle which globally is recognized as what's called the triple convergence principle. Because of which just widening road space really doesn't help you ease congestion. Very soon the same level of congestion will come back, but at a much higher volume of traffic. There's some very interesting data that I picked out of the Times of India just a few days ago. 6th of May, Times of India came up with some very interesting information. They said vehicle density is the highest in Chennai. And what they did was they took the number of vehicles, the road length, and the number of vehicles per kilometer of road was the vehicle density they came up with. And Chennai has 2,093. Delhi is only 245. Now, the moment you hear about vehicle density, the perception is, well, if the vehicle density is so high, congestion should be very high. True. But you look at the pollution levels. The last column gives you the pollution levels. Again, this is figures that I've taken from today's Times of India, the PM 2.5. Delhi is 242. Chennai is only 30. Pune is only 73. Mumbai is only 29. So even though vehicle densities are high, your pollution levels are much lower. So it's really a question of, we need to think of, look, do we want such a large number of vehicles? And Delhi has 30,000 kilometers of road. Look at the other cities. So what I'm trying to say, more road is not just more vehicles, also more pollution. And we all know Delhi is amongst the worst in the world as far as pollution is concerned, but huge road space. Now, some of the global best practices is something that many people are shocked to hear. I'm talking of what's called the Chongaegon Freeway in Seoul. They had a little canal going right through the middle of the city. In 1975, they decided that because of so many vehicles and you need to create more road space, they covered up that canal and built an elevated expressway going right through the middle of the city. And this is a picture of that. In 2002, there was a mayor who realized that this is actually making things worse. It's not helping. He decided to demolish that elevated expressway. Along with that, he demolished 42 flyovers. And from 2005, what they have is this. The canal has been restored. This is today the center of attraction for most people in Seoul. In the evening, you see them with their families. A good recreation center. Now, they would wonder what happened to that mayor. Politically, what happened to that mayor? Did he lose his job? Yes, he lost his job. He became the president of Korea. So that's the degree of popularity that it attracted, this kind of a thing. And what they've also found is the number of cars coming in and going out of the central business district came down by about 18%. Public transport ridership, particularly the metro ridership, went up almost 14%. Air pollution came down 34%. Yet the speeds within the city didn't change very much because it brought about a shift from using motor vehicles to public transport. And that is really our challenge. Dealing with congestion, that is really our challenge. How do we get people to move out with the comfort of their personal vehicles into public transport? Myth 2. I've heard this from many cities around the country. We are building metro that will solve congestion. Nowhere in the world has that happened. Nowhere in the world has that happened. Beijing has 450 kilometers of metro. It has 25,000 buses. Population is very similar to Delhi's population. Delhi, we have 193 kilometers of metro now. We have about 5,500 buses against Beijing's 25,000 buses. But Beijing is one of the most congested cities in the world. So the belief that the metro will help you solve congestion hasn't happened anywhere in the world. Paris has an excellent metro system. We can't say they don't have congestion. London has an excellent metro system. You can't say it doesn't have congestion. So congestion doesn't go away with just the metro. This is the second myth I wanted to get across. So what do we do? If these don't help solve the problem, what do we do? I think the answer lies in, one, focusing on demand management. We all along tend to focus on supply management. How do you create more infrastructure to accommodate the demand? Is there a way we can try and help reduce the demand, cut down on the demand? And when you say demand, demand comes really three major variables to that demand. One is how much do people travel? On a daily basis, what's the average number of trips people make? Second, what is the length of these trips? And how many people are making these trips? So the number of people, the average number of trips per person, and the average length of each of these trips. These are three different variables that you need to address in demand management. And what has been tried in many countries very successfully is to look at compact cities and look at cities where you have mixed use planning. What this tends to do is reduce the length of the trip. So spatial planning, good spatial planning towards compact cities and land use, which are mixed land use patterns, helps to reduce the length of the trip. Then you need an integrated public transport system, not pieces. Pieces are not good enough. You need an integrated public transport system. And finally, a focus on quality of the public transport system. I'll go to each of these, but a very important focus on quality, because I'll come to this in another slide. And often the solutions do not lie within the transport system, they lie outside the transport system. So this whole element of compact cities and mixed use planning is not something to do with transport planning, it's much more to do with land use planning. So solutions often lie outside the transport system. This is a graph of urban density to energy consumed in transport. It's really the energy consumed in transport is a proxy for how much travel demand really happens. And you see a rectangular hyperbola, so that as the density increases, the energy consumption in transport comes down. It's the shape of a rectangular hyperbola. The names of the cities are not very clear from this distance, but effectively, this is high energy consumption, low density, typical of cities in North America. These are in between, typically cities in Europe, and high density, low energy consumption is again typical of cities in Asia. So we are really at the place where we should be. This is where we want to be. But the tendency today is we are moving in the opposite direction. We are moving in the wrong direction. And this is what we want to try and reverse or control. Now, what kind of a city do we want? Is this the kind of city we want, or is this the kind of city we want? These are decisions we have to take quickly. We can't wait. Because once cities start growing and land use patterns start getting firmed up, they stay for years, they stay for decades. It's difficult to change land use patterns. So we can't really wait till these lock-in effects of land use have already taken place. We need to plan them at an early stage so that it grows in the way we want it to grow. And the reason I'm saying this is the argument for focusing on our smaller cities now. Let's not wait till the problem has become so acute that we start focusing on transport at a much later stage. So small cities need attention now, otherwise they'll grow in the wrong direction. Example of two cities, Barcelona and Atlanta. I call this a tale of two cities because of the wide diversity you see here. Both have more or less similar population, but the population is spread over vastly different areas. 162 square kilometers for Barcelona, 4,280 kilometers for Atlanta. It manifests itself, the carbon emissions in Atlanta are 9 times what you have in Barcelona. Now, carbon emissions really means proportionately so much more energy use, so much more travel, so much more motorized travel. That's what it's really a proxy for. And to my mind, smart cities are those that would be efficient in the use of resources. It meets the travel demand of people, but using far less energy than what an unsmart city would do. What do I mean by integrated public transport? It's not just a metro, not just a bus, not just an auto rickshaw, not just a minibus. They need to be properly integrated, and the integration happens through institutional integration. If you have different institutions that don't talk to each other, you will not get integration. You must have institutional integration. You must have physical integration. So there must be terminals where these two can interchange. People coming on a metro can take a bus through physical terminals. So that's the physical integration. You have operational integration. So schedules which they use are integrated schedules. So you have timetables which are common timetables across different modes. You have fare integration. A single fare collection system would be used on any mode of transport. You go to Seoul, you have something called a T-money. That's a smart card. You use it on the metro, you use it on the bus, you use it for parking, you use it on a taxi. You can also use it in retail outlets. Single card, but common facility across. I've not seen people there thinking in terms of, oh, I have to take a bus from here to here and a metro from there to there. Integration is so good that people get out of the metro station, they have the bus waiting there for them, just get onto the bus and go. So fair integration. Finally, a psychological integration. The passenger must believe that he's using a common system. He's using a system that is seamless. Between one mode and the other, there should be no hassles for him. That's what I call psychological integration. A picture of a BRT system connecting to a feeder bus system. You have the BRT system on the left, the feeder bus on the right. People just get off from this, move on to this, just across the platform. And if you notice in this picture, the platform on the left is higher than the platform on the right, because the BRT is, you don't use steps to get onto a BRT bus. You just walk into the BRT bus like you would do on a metro. So this platform is so designed that it's very convenient from both sides. So very easy transfer from one mode to the other. A little bit on what do I mean by focusing on quality? Why is this important? I would say commuters would be classified into three categories. The kind of a simple classification I use. One, those who use their cars. Then you have those who use motorbikes or two-wheelers or second-hand cars, old cars. Third, those who use public transport or they use non-motorized modes, walking, cycling. And as the income levels go up, you generally see a shift from the lower levels to the higher levels. So people would move from public transport to motorbikes, and then as income levels go up further, from motorbikes to cars. This is the general shift that tends to happen. Again, I argue, the people who use cars, they're really captive to the car. Trying to shift them to public transport is going to be very hard to do. They are at a certain level where shifting to public transport is not going to be easy. That's one level. Those who are using public transport can't afford anything else, so they're there. They are where you want them to be. So that's the most sustainable mode that you're already on that. Our target group for the efforts is really this one. And this is the group you want to try and bring back to the public transport mode. Now, where is the challenge? I think for this group, price is important. Affordability is an issue. If we increase prices, it hurts them. So it's difficult to increase prices because of this group. But for this group, quality is important. They're willing to pay more, but unless you give them better quality, they will not shift. So you're really coming into a price versus quality trade-off. There was a time when we all thought of public transport as the last resort of somebody who could not afford anything else. So we had to keep it affordable to him. It was not important for others, it was important for the people who could not afford any other means of transport. I think that paradigm has changed today. Today, public transport is important even for those who can afford personal vehicles from a larger social angle. We want them to also use public transport, and this is where quality becomes important. So how do you strike a balance between price and quality? I think that is a challenge. There are a few ways in which cities have done it. If you improve quality, the cost will go up. So if the cost goes up, do you increase the price? Or do you find other ways of financing that system? The other thing that cities have done is use two levels of transport. So you have premium services and you have, say, baseline services or Janta services. So Delhi, you have the green buses and the red buses. So these are ways in which cities have tried to differentiate them. Have a quality service which need not be subsidized, it charges more, and you have the baseline services which get subsidized and are really used for those who can't afford anything else. This is in a nutshell the kind of things I wanted to get across. And what I would say is, in sum, we have to focus on what is causing the congestion before trying to deal with the congestion. It needs a diagnosis. The diagnosis has to precede the kind of remedies we want to put together. It's not the same for every city. I would also say focus on reducing demand, not just increasing supply. Focus on quality of the public transport system, not just the price of the public transport system, and finally focus on a well-integrated public transport system, not on pieces of that public transport system. This is what I wanted to leave with, and then I think we can have more through a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Agarwal, for what I thought was an extremely clear and well articulated opening remarks. And you've touched a number of issues. And before I throw it over to the floor, let me just ask you a question about the proposal that has been made. You talked about integrated institutions and integrated multimodal transport policy. There was once a proposal in India for all metropolitan areas to have an urban metropolitan transport agency, UMTAS, and modeled much along the lines of, I would say, Transport for London, something like that, so that's integrated. And what's happened to that? Is it still on the files, and what do you think is the future for agencies like the UMTA? Do you think that's the right way to go about it? But you can answer this while we'll collect a few more questions from the audience. Please identify yourselves, and could you please be brief? Thank you.
I am also. Okay, just want to know one thing from Professor. Why the BRT of Delhi, which was a really good experiment, has been scrapped by Kejriwal, who is a sympathizer of this public transport.
Collect a few, maybe 5 questions, and then we'll have another round.
Hi, my name is Shekhar Mittal. One question I have is that how much of the congestion can be attributed to just lack of following rules and regulations while being on the road, and what can actually be done about it? Like when I drive in Delhi, I feel a lot of it is just cultural, and I feel like the challenge seems to be quite insurmountable, and that was not a point that was covered in your talk.
Good evening, Mr. Pradeep Bhattacharya, architect and urban planner, also transport planner. It's a deadly combination.
I think that's the right combination.
Well, you have always spoken about the integration as far as the public transport is concerned. Don't you think at policy level also integration should take place when the policies are made for land use planning and transport planning as well? And also, as far as the physical planning is concerned, during the planning, normally we see that land use planning takes place separately in an isolated way, and transport planning takes place separately. But don't you think that each of these two areas, it should be integrated? Thank you.
I am Y.S. Dwivedi, Director in Ministry of Rural Development. Just one simple thing. Suppose DTC is working in Delhi and I want to go travel by DTC. But there is no timetable for DTC, or I have checked in other cities also, there is no timetable system for the DTC buses or other state buses. What I suggest, if some timetable is prepared and it is circulated and it is tried to be maintained, something can happen. And there are very simple solutions, I will tell you. On the bus stand, suppose bus number 610 is there, when it is going to come, if that system can be generated on the bus stand, the bus number and next after how many minutes it's going to come, that will create. Otherwise, suppose I go to the bus stand and I don't know when the next bus will come. And this system can be generated, people will start.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a second. I think there are enough questions for the first round. We'll let Dr. Agarwal respond, and then we'll have a second round of discussion. Dr. Agarwal.
Let me start with the UMTA. I think Mr. Mishra is here. He'll probably be the best person to tell us where the UMTA stand. The question was, there is a plan to set up unified metropolitan transport authorities, and what is the status on those. But let me say what I'm aware of, and then maybe Mr. Bishop will supplement this. A number of cities have set it up. A number of cities have set it up. But my own understanding is it's been set up more as a reaction to a demand from the ministry. If you want some funding from the ministry, you must set it up. That's why many cities set it up. But it's not functioning effectively. It is being set up not because there is a felt need for something like that, or there is a recognition in those cities for something of this sort, but just because the ministry asked for it, they set it up. After that, it's really not functioned too effectively. A few cities, I think, have done a good job. Mumbai, they are using the MMRDA as their UNTA. Similarly, in Chennai, they have the Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority has set up an UNTA, which is also functioning very well. So that is Delhi has so far not set up anything. Hyderabad has set up something. But what I have seen from a lot of the international experiences, I think the way we have thought of the UNTAs is only a first step. The way we've thought of the UNTA here is you have a committee of the key officials who are coming together, discussing their problems and trying to develop plans on a common table. I think this is only a starting point. What we need to think of at a later stage is the example you gave of Transport for London. I think that's the kind of model we need to move towards. And 4 or 5 examples that I know of, very successful models of this nature. Transport for London is one, STIF in Paris is another one. You have TransLink in Vancouver, which is yet another one. You have the Land Transport Authority in Singapore, which is yet another one. The key thing we found with all of them, they've all come up under legislation. There is legislative backing. UNTAs, we don't have that kind of legislative backing. But the strength of these institutions which have succeeded is not so much the law, but is the financial muscle they have. They have the money to allocate between different components of the transport system. So they have the money to allocate for parking, they have the money to allocate for metros, they have the money to allocate for buses. It's their financial muscle which has really made them powerful. They've not come up overnight. Transport for London evolved over 60, 70 years. STIF has evolved over a similar period. TransLink has taken a similar period. Singapore has happened much faster, but then Singapore, a lot of things happen much faster. So that's why I think in India, the UNTA is a good first step, but we have to look beyond the UNTA. I don't think it's best if it just happens because of a direction, but there has to be some kind of a felt need, and that's where it will really sustain. So much about the UNTA. BRT Delhi, frankly, I'm not fully familiar with the Delhi BRT system. I'm aware that there has been a lot of criticism about the BRT system in Delhi. I'm not fully aware of the system in Delhi. All I'll say is, as a concept, it's a good concept. But Ahmedabad has done well. But you know, it's very important to see where it does well and where it doesn't do well. I think the choice of the corridor we make, the choice of the alignment we have, the kind of demand you have on that, these are important things to take into account before deciding where we want to do a metro, where we want to do a BRT. If a place needs a metro, you have to do a metro. If you do a BRT, it won't work. If a place needs only a BRT, it doesn't need a metro. If you do the metro, fine, the metro will work, but you'll be paying for it for a long, long period of time. So there is a professional exercise called an alternatives analysis, which is generally carried out before deciding what mode to choose. And that is something we generally have not been doing. I think a good alternatives analysis is something that needs to be mandated. But unless this has been done, we do not agree to fund it. And the question also always comes up of who does that alternatives analysis. If you give it to somebody who's sold on the metro, he'll obviously suggest a metro. If you give it to somebody who's sold on the BRT, he'll obviously suggest the BRT. Now, how do you get a neutral agency that will do this analysis in a neutral way and give you the right thing? Specific Delhi, I really don't know enough about the Delhi BRT and why and what is happening to comment too much on that. Congestion, whether it's a cultural issue, yes, I think, our lack of lane discipline is a big problem and causing the congestion. It's not just the number of vehicles, but the kind of lane discipline, the kind of traffic discipline we have. I would even say, to some extent, the kind of road design that we have. In most places, you would find if a road is coming into a kind of a arterial road, you allow some space for the vehicle to come in here and then merge, but we don't have that everywhere. And there are many points in Delhi I have seen where I think it just needs a simple shifting of a bus stop from this place another 10 meters and the problem gets sorted out. Now, it's difficult for me to explain it here, but a number of cases like this where a simple traffic audit of that place will help to ease problem. But that, I agree with you, that is a problem. Land use transport integration, I could not agree with you more. They happen in different agencies, they happen at different points of time. And to my mind, most land use plans really give you the road network. I think what we need to move towards as a first step is all master plans will not only have the road network, they must also have the public transport plan. The mass transit plan should be part of the master plan. In Singapore, they came up with a 50-year concept plan as the base document. That concept plan includes both the land use and the mass transit in one document. So that provided the guidance to the overall transport planning as well. So it is extremely important that land use and transport planning needs to be integrated. Ideally should happen together, no doubts about that. DTC is active. I think this needs to be conveyed to DTC. I'm not part of DTC, but I'll give you a simple example. The first time I got into the transport sector in the state government, I was posted as Secretary Transport in Assam. And the Assam State Transport Corporation, when I started having my discussions with them, I said, why don't you have a timetable? They didn't have a timetable. So why don't you have a timetable? It seems so easy. The answer I was given is, look, we don't know how many buses we'll have available on any particular day. You don't know how many buses we'll have available on any particular day. Well, many of them are under repair. But I said, look, you must be having 6 months data. If you have 6 month data, why don't you take the smallest number and say, okay, we'll have at least that many available. The thought had never occurred to them. And then I just casually asked them, how do you decide? I mean, which bus will go at what times? No, what we do is every time a bus driver reports for duty, we give him the key for that bus, take that bus and take it on that route. So it's decided on the spur of the moment. That's not the way to run a transport system. You're right, you need a timetable, you need a schedule. Things have to go as per that. Because you're absolutely right, if I'm waiting at a bus stop, and if I know that the next bus is going to come in 15 minutes, I may wait for it. But if it is due to come in the next 2 minutes, but I don't know, I might just leave. First round of time.
Yes. So, okay, now we open ourselves to the second round. Yes, please. Everybody will. This is basically a conversation, so everybody will be able to. Please be patient.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. See, the countries which you chose for comparisons, like London or Seoul, these are all complexities are much less as compared to India. When you look at the population, the type of the roads which we have, the quality of roads which we have, the number of speed breakers you have, number of signal lights which don't work. So there are many things which is adding to the complexity. And when you look at Chandigarh model is one, and Hyderabad, Bangalore, Chennai, everything is unique in its own cultural, topographical, the quality of problems which lead to congestion. So can we not look at like integrated public transport approach you said for as one important solution? But I think you should go also along with all others, integrated with the road the congestions. like the type of quality, the parts which you have slowed down slowly, similar to the lights don't work. And speed breakers, number of them which we have, may not be there in Seoul or other countries as we have here. So I think we should look at the state-specific models where this integrated public transport system will be a very key important solution. But I think it should also be looked at with the other factors. So it should be a multi-dimensional approach to solve the congestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Good evening, this is Tarun Sharma from Icarus. My question to Dr. Agarwal is, there are two questions actually. One is relating to one of the slides that he showed on the population versus vehicle density. And Chandigarh seems to be an outlier or an anomaly. Is there a reason behind that? If you could explain. In one of the slides.
The growth in number of vehicles.
And the second question.
Let me answer that right away. I have a doubt on that data.
Okay.
I have a feeling there's something wrong with the data. It shows equal number of vehicles. I think that has been taken wrong. I don't think it's right.
Okay. The second question.
Do you also have a similar doubt about the data on Calcutta? If you see the population and vehicle, that's the only city in the country
Where it's come down.
where it is, yes.
It
I'm
could be
wondering
less.
how that
That's
could happen.
what I have a doubt on that too. It's data from the road transport statistics, Ministry of Road Transport. But, yes.
The second question is regarding the, you mentioned that the focus needs to be on demand-based approaches. In Indian context, could you, as in not from the technical side, but more from a layman's perspective, elaborate on the challenges that we face in using a demand-based modeling approach as compared to a supply-based approach in terms of data?
Shall we? There, and then we take questions. Yeah.
Yeah. My name is Frank Samuel from GIZ, German International Corporation. I'm working in urban development and in transport as well. And I would like to thank you for your very concise presentation of the symptoms, the causes, and some of the solutions. I'm wondering a little bit, let's say, why many of these solutions, which are quite well known, are not actually taken on and followed up. And you have talked about the issue of the UTMAs, where I think it would be interesting to add a little bit also the political dimension. And London Transport might be a good example. So London Transport has gone through different periods. There were periods where the quality of the service was miserable, which somehow coincided with the abolishment of London as a city council, as a unified administration. And I had the pleasure to listen to a presentation of the director of London Transport, who said that London Transport's revival actually began when there was a newly elected mayor and a unified city administration again. So let's say you mentioned financial muscle, but I think equally important is also the political muscle and the political accountability, which leads a little bit to, let's say, more general questions. Why is this not being implemented on a broader scale in India? I hear often, we should do this, or they did this in Singapore. Planners or architects, engineers should follow this path or go for this option. But the actual question is really who? Who should really follow this up? Who is responsible for following this up? Again, leading to this political question and political accountability. And I think my impression of having worked now a bit in India is that this is one of the crucial points. Let's say who is responsible, who is accountable, and who is influencing what will be done.
Hello, that was really very interesting. What I want to understand is that we want to focus on reducing demand. How realistic that is, considering that we still have a lot of catching up to do in terms of demand not being saturated. Given our middle class, or given the upper middle class, given the fact that their demand level is still not reached the peak, most of them would like to have probably more private transport, and this is not very realistic as far as I can understand.
We'll come back to this thing. We come back.
Yeah, my name is Pratap Chandani. Majority of the workforce or population is classified youth, almost 65%. Also, IIT Delhi study shows, for example, if there was lack of fear and people were to start using their cycles, then you would save minimum of 250,000 liters of fuel every day in Delhi alone. So there's that. There's a study of IIT Delhi which shows that if there was lack of fear, use cycles, so people who own cycles and they were to start using properly, then there would be a saving of 250,000 liters of fuel daily minimum. Okay, and also in other cities, it's been found that as it is moved from cycling to motorized, the health has deteriorated. Okay, there have been health issues. So that needs to be positioned as a social thing. But, and at the same time, you have these, due to congestion, the price, the speed of vehicles coming down, and because of technology improvements, cycle speeds are going up. We are able to demonstrate in Delhi and NDMC areas speeds of 40, 50, 60 without too much effort. Okay, even without rides, right? So, but with all this, how come, we have an anomaly where the import duty on cycles are very high, on quality cycles, which take that from your pyramid, the top and the bottom, because you make it a lifestyle and a health, and you project it that way. So people shift. So one, you have challenges on cycling lanes, they are big, a lot of money spent, but not functional. And then you have this import duty thing, which is limited. So that increases the cost of the cycling.
Thank you. Okay. So we come back. We have another round.
So in just 5 minutes, okay.
We will have another round. I think Dr. Agarwal is captive with us today. He's been here since the morning in another seminar.
Let me start with this one on other countries are less complex than us. True. In fact, I would go a little further. That this public transport culture in a lot of the European countries really happened when the IC engine had not been invented. So it was the pre-IC engine stage. So they hadn't seen cars. That's why the cities were designed in such a way that it was public transport friendly. The problems really were in the US when they started thinking of their transport systems after the IC engine came, and it became much more of a car culture. And we seem to be picking up that car culture. Yes, we are certainly a lot more complex. We have more complexity, but I think because of that complexity, it's all the more important that you have a single institution that is coordinating multiple things. It's really like a much more complex orchestra that someone has to orchestrate correctly. That's the reason why I think it's very, very important for us to have a powerful single agency that coordinates transport in all the cities. And let me use this to go to this thing about, it's not financial muscle, but political muscle also. True, but that political muscle comes provided there is importance. If that's not there, the political level is hardly interested. If he sees value in what he can do and resources available to be able to do that, there will be political interest even in that. So I think I agree with you that you need very strong political champions to be able to carry this forward. And it cannot happen with, mid-level kind of functionaries being there. You need someone who's really influential to be able to get things done from multiple agencies dealing with transport. In fact, this morning, one of the things I discovered was something I didn't know. In Delhi, there are 17 agencies responsible for streetlights.
Yeah.
17 different agencies responsible for streetlights. How do you coordinate? You have a metro system planning to build a line in a certain direction, but a competing road is also getting widened. Now, this is where that agency would be able to decide which one do I want? Do I want both? Or do I want only one of them? And if so, which is the better one? So that really needs a single agency. And our complexity makes it all the more important that we have that kind of an agency.
So can't you, if we assess that this is the biggest factor in causing congestion, that is the integration of the institutions?
I think so. I think so.
Other factors remaining of the lesser
I
weight.
think so. Absolutely right. Now, demand versus supply, I think it's not a case of demand versus supply. I think we need both. I'm not saying that let's forget about supply, only focus on demand. As you said very rightly, we've not reached the level of saturation. We will still grow, but can that pace of growth come down a little bit? That's all I'm trying to argue for. You see, you will have a lot more people who will be traveling. That there's no doubt. You will have a lot more people who will be traveling. But can we try and play around with the distance that they need to travel? Can we play around with how many times they need to travel? Today, with a lot of this e-commerce and IT related things, there are so many trips that we don't have to take. Today, if you go to a movie, you don't go once to book your ticket and second time to see the movie. This is what I mean by demand management. So these are things that can bring down the number of trips you make and also bring down the trip lengths. The number of people traveling will grow. You can't help it, that will grow up because our cities are urbanizing. And the next 30 years, our cities will have twice the population they have today. But it's scary to think of it, they have to travel the same way. Where are we headed? I can't even think of what's going to happen. So that's where demand management becomes important. It's not that we are cutting down the number of people who will travel, the number of people will go up. These are things you can play around with. Fuel saving, cycling, I don't agree more. But what is, I think the important thing to look at is why is it not happening or what is the problem? To my mind, the problem is the safety aspects of cycling are not really getting addressed. As a class 6 student, I used to say in Chanakyapuri, and go to a school near Ashoka Hotel. The Air Force Central School was then at that place. And I used to cycle. As a class 6 student, my parents were not scared of my cycling to this place. Today, I don't think I'll let my children do that. Why? Because it's not safe. Now, when we design a cycle track, I think we need to look at a lot of small things on how that cycle track is designed. It's not good enough if you leave it in mixed traffic for short periods and then create segregation separately. No, you want a completely dedicated and segregated all along. You can't have a situation where if the curve is ending, you take a bounce down. No, it has to be inclined. No, these are small issues of design which if you take care of, will do a lot towards cycling.
But they get encroached in Delhi, that's what we find.
They get encroached partly because they don't get used. Because the design is so bad, they don't get used. I mean, it's both sides, both sides. But then, you see, again, something that I would again say that they get encroached because there is someone who has a need that we haven't provided for. No one likes to encroach on the cycle track. But he's coming in because he has a need and we've not provided for that need. So I think that whole road cross section, we need to provide for everyone who needs space there. And if that is done well, I feel that encroachment will not happen. But cycling is extremely important. Of course, as the city size grows, cycling distances grow, it becomes more difficult to cycle that long distances. But shorter distances are certainly possible. Let's say a metro. I would say cycling as a feeder to a metro is an extremely good thing to look at. But we need parking facilities for the cycles at that point. And we need short but safe cycle tracks to get us to the metro station. That could be one place where we begin. Every metro station would have, say, a 3-kilometer radius, good cycling networks coming in with parking facilities for the bicycles. I think many people will do that. So I think fuel savings is certainly huge attraction to try and work on this. Have I missed out anything?
I think there was a question on what exactly you meant by demand management. If you could kind of deconstruct demand management, I think that's the question.
Let me say, what is travel demand? Travel demand is the total number of vehicle kilometers that are traveled. Usually you would look at it as passenger kilometers, but in our context we are more concerned about the number of vehicles, so we say vehicle kilometers traveled. The vehicle kilometers depends on three things. One, the number of people traveling. So that is a function of the population, and the population is going up, so we have very little control on that. The second is, how many trips do each person, how many trips on an average does a person make per day? There will generally be 2 trips in any case, one to go to work, one to come back. But there are invariably a few other trips that are made for various purposes, recreation, shopping, various other purposes. So the number of trips that people make. Third, and most importantly, what is the length of each of these trips? Now, what I'm trying to say is the length of each of these trips is a function of how we planned land use. If you've looked at land use in a compact form, that means cities are compact, your trip lengths come down. If you've planned land use in such a way that you have mixed use planning, that means you have residential and commercial areas interspersed. I was in Washington DC for several years. Washington DC land use is interspersed. I was living in a place where you had a lot of office areas also. So this is the concept of mixed use planning. It's hardly 10 minutes walk from where I live to where I worked. So this idea of mixed use planning is something which is traditional in India. Actually, most small towns just go a lot of people, but how far they travel and how frequently they travel, I think that's what is controllable.
Thank you. We'll take one more round of questions. I know Dr. Agarwal has been here since the morning and must be tired. So one last round of questions. Please start with you and we'll go over to
Good evening, I am Chandan Shah. Actually, as per my experience in India, most of the cities except Mumbai, there is a huge wide range of vehicles are driving on the road. Does it not cause a huge congestion on the road? And if Mumbai cities have been restricting the number of, mode of vehicles, they are restricting. Auto cannot fly in the Mumbai city. Rickshaws, cycles, even two-wheelers were not earlier allowed, now it is allowed. Why it has not been accepted in other cities? And second point is on the part of the pollution. I think so, Calcutta has much more pollution what figure show. That's my experience. But in Mumbai city, pollution has been controlled since 70s. And in one of the finest city where emission of pollutants has been very minimal. If Mumbai city has been able to control that pollutants, why not in other cities? Thank you.
I'm Komal Precourt, and my question is how effective separate bus lanes are.
I'm KRG Nair. First of all, I'd like to compliment Dr. Agarwal for his excellent presentation and stress on demand management. I have only one little quibble with him. The quibble and his stress on quality, particularly of public transport, is very well taken. The only quibble is, you see, when you say that there is a, I thought you were taking a static picture, because you say the car users. I'm finding a wonderful shift of car users to metro users now. Because a car moves at 2 kilometers per hour in Delhi, in many congested areas. In metro, you move slightly faster. So that shift you may take into account. And I think that is taking place. I've seen it happen. And second thing is, demand management in terms of number of cars possessed per household. Some Singaporean suggestion which has been made by two US economists recently in a latest study on transport. Some ban on the number of cars that a household can possess so that parking problems, conditions can reduce, I think is not against freedom in any manner. Thank you.
My name is Harpal Dave. I am an urban planner and a government servant. So my question is, nowadays in metro cities like Delhi, lot of private cabs are coming up they provide service for taxis. And the mobile application and the smartphones are making it very convenient to use such cabs, as well as auto rickshaws. Can we as a policy subsidize such services, because they are doing a great service? People like me who are young age, sometimes are tempted to buy a car. But if one does the financial calculation, these services are doing they are very cheap as per the financial calculation. The only thing which is keeping the price low is the sheer competition that they are facing from each other. But if there is a policy by the government which subsidizes these services, then maybe overall number of car ownership in the cities comes down. Second is that I was staying in Goa of 10 years back for about 6-7 months. There we have a unique concept of two-wheeler taxis, they call it captains. It is a very convenient thing for a single traveler, and it is very cheap also. Apart from Goa, I have found those things never in any other city. But if cities like Delhi and other metro cities take up those two-wheeler taxi concept, it can be very useful.
My name is Vinay Jha. I am a layman as far as urban planning and transport is concerned. But the last answer that Dr. Agrawal provided regarding demand management, there was one aspect that, especially as far as Delhi is concerned, hits you straight away, is the time management or phasing of professions and offices. And an example straight away is that for the last 1 year, one has noticed that areas around Humayun Road and Tughlaq Road and Rajaji Marg, between 9 and quarter to 10, they are jammed. They were never jammed earlier because government servants used to phase their arrival to office. And these days, suddenly you find that there is a problem there. So that is one aspect that I thought is extremely critical as far as urban transport management is concerned. The other, sorry, I can just take another half a minute. The other issue is that transport is only an element of urban planning. So the NCR experiment that took place, where people tried to create incentives for families and individuals to settle in areas away from Delhi, has not reduced the population push into Delhi. So there are people who come into Delhi who get water once in 2 weeks, 14 days, which they store and use for the next 14 days. Even they are willing to come to Delhi and go through its trials and tribulations, but they will not stop coming to Delhi. So ultimately, we have to be able to manage to provide these services to the people. And the fact is that our roads have vehicles that are capable of traveling at 10 kilometers an hour, rickshaws, thelas, and at 180 kilometers an hour. And they are all sharing the same space. So it is not just cycles. It is not just non-motorized vehicles, but ultimately some kind of a management of the road space also is required. Well, these are not necessarily questions, but I thought just my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Lady here, I think give lady last question.
Good evening. My name is Aparna Das, and I'm an architect planner, and I work with GIZ. I must say that I have always seen your name in various papers, and I have read your articles. I'm talking to Mr. Agarwal, but I've never seen you before. So it's been fantastic to hear you, and so crystal clear. And I also feel that confidence, and that confidence with which you argue a point was really very impressive for me. Because most of the time I find that as planner, the voice of planners are always shaky, and this is like this can happen and that can also happen, and it's not ever so confident. I'm just wondering that your this focus on saying that it is outside the transport as such. Yes, so the land use planning. When we see that we have 4,000 so-called certificated cities, and out of which around 182 master plans are prepared. And then I look in Delhi and I say, okay, Delhi's master plan has been prepared with so much of zeal and enthusiasm, but only 27% of the city is following this master plan. As a planner, I sometimes question that, are we on the right track? Is making this master plans, does it have a point or it doesn't have a point? And the moment we start arguing about that we need a coordination committee and we need to coordinate to put in all this discipline, I wonder whether would we ever achieve that, or we require a completely different paradigm of planning. And that graph was quite interesting for me to see that, okay, we are at the right track. We are at the low energy consumption, so we are doing well, and we should not be making the mistake. Now, making these master plans and then the zonal plans and then the area plans, which is not happening, and we are training our children or the new juniors that please master this art. So are we doing something right and going off track, or we have missed on discovering this paradigm that we require for our cities? And I think, is this a question that we should be asking, or getting into this coordination bit again and again, which we are not achieving anyways? Maybe it's a good thing that we are not achieving it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Dr.
There's quite a few, but I think I'll try and do this quickly. First one was about this wide range of vehicles on our roads. I mean, yes, compared to many other countries, the heterogeneity of traffic that you see on Indian roads is probably more than what you see in many other places. So if you have a vehicle traveling at 10 kilometers an hour, another one which can travel at 180 kilometers an hour, the speed of the traffic will be the speed of the slowest vehicle. It cannot be faster than that. Now, there is a case for trying to separate slow-moving vehicles from fast-moving vehicles, but it's limited by how much space you have on the road. So this is a challenge we have to live with. There's no option. Let me link it with this other one on value of separate bus lanes. I think there is value to it, provided we use that well. If you take a lane for buses and you run a bus on that once in 5 minutes, it will create opposition. If your frequency of buses is not high enough to warrant the use of a lane, you will have problems. You will have problems from others who are seeing heavy congestion, and I think that's one of the things that's been seen in the case of Delhi. So while I feel that separate bus lanes are useful, we should also be fair in how much we use it. What is its utilization like? So the point is, if you have enough buses running on a certain corridor, yes, there is value to creating a separate lane for the bus. But if you don't have enough, then I think you're going to run into problems. Pollution, there was a mention of, well, Calcutta's pollution, these are not my numbers, these are numbers that I've taken from published.
My experience, Calcutta, you won't find a vehicle which are fumes are not coming out.
No.
No,
that's the message was not so much the exact number, but the fact that pollution in Calcutta is certainly a lot less than in Delhi. I think that message, no one would dispute that. Mumbai, I think Mumbai was very fortunate. In many ways, Mumbai was very fortunate. It's a linear city. You've got a suburban system which is there, and that suburban system has been meeting transport needs of Bombay very effectively. I think it's an outstanding system. It's not something that perhaps happened by design, but Bombay grew along that corridor because there was no space to grow elsewhere. So it became a linear city. And in a linear city, mass transit is the most effective. But all you need to do is put a high density corridor along that spine, and it meets a lot of needs along that. So Bombay in many ways is fortunate. And And I think the fact that it has a good public transport system of that nature is what has helped Bombay to not get as polluted as other places. We've also known BEST, at least for a long time. We always knew that BEST was the best bus service in Bombay. Today maybe others have overtaken it, but it's still a very good bus service. So that is a benefit that Bombay had inherently. Delhi unfortunately has not had that. So that's probably one of the reasons why. And Bombay, if you look at the road length, in Bombay is very little. Barely 9% of Bombay's area is covered by roads. Delhi is closer to 25 to 30%. If you look at a benchmark internationally, I think it's about 12%. 12 to 15% is considered a reasonable area on the roads. So cities where you have more than this on the roads, you have to control the number of vehicles. Cities where you have less than this, there is a case for building more road space. To me, Delhi, there's no case for building more roads. Delhi is a very strong case for controlling the number of vehicles, not building more roads. Bombay, you could think of building more roads. So this is what I meant by doing a diagnosis before coming to the remedies. Without doing that, we're really acting as that doctor who's giving you Crocin when you have malaria. Now, Singapore, no, let me get to the other one. You're very right. There has been a shift from the car to the metro. That's absolutely right. What has caused that shift is the heavy congestion on the road. Now, the reason I'm giving this argument is if you start widening the roads, that shift will reverse. So I think, trying to put in more roads in Delhi, you're really reversing the few good things that are happening. So I agree with you completely on that. What would accentuate or enhance this shift that is happening is if you could think of good feeder networks. Good feeder networks. And the feeder network is not only buses. I would say a good footpath is a feeder. A good parking facility is a feeder. A good cycle track is a feeder. If we start having these feeder networks, and it's not difficult, there has to be a willingness.
Copenhagen.
There has to be a willingness, but the metro system standalone cannot function. It has to function along with a feeder network. Then the feeder networks are not difficult to design, it's possible. Singapore, there was a mention about reduction of cars in Singapore. Yes, I do agree that Singapore has very, very strong ownership restraint measures. Now, this issue was debated quite strongly when the National Urban Transport Policy was being formulated. And since I was involved in the process, the main argument where we said that let's not try to control ownership, let's try to control use, is because we said there is a large auto industry in this country, which employs a lot of people. So we didn't want to adversely affect the auto industry. We have a large export of autos. So that's why we said to start with, let's not discourage ownership, but we should try to discourage use. And then there is, as people's incomes go up, owning an automobile is a natural tendency to show your higher income status. Let's not kill that urge. So that's the reason why ownership did not get too much of a deterrent. I would also say that these kind of strong deterrent measures are good if alternatives are available. If alternatives are not available, you're really killing mobility. You are adversely affecting access. Today, I don't think in Delhi we have a public transport system that we can say is good enough for us to start imposing restraint measures on ownership. People would have viewpoints, but I really don't think it's still good enough. Radio cabs, yes, I think radio cabs have functioned very well. But the need to subsidize them, I'm not too convinced. I think on their own they're doing a great job. And big thing that they're doing is you're reducing empty haulage. You're bringing in greater fuel efficiency by making sure this guy doesn't have to travel long distances without a passenger. But I don't think they really need a subsidy. But what I would say is, suppose we extend this to auto rickshaws. Radio cabs are serving a certain need. Everyone can't afford a radio cab, but a lot of people can afford auto rickshaws. Can we think of a similar arrangement for auto rickshaws?
Already started as a micro.
Many places,
There are
yes. So I think that's a move in the right direction. This idea of staggering demand, I think that's excellent. You need to stagger demand. Now, many are not aware, but today Delhi has an inherent staggering of demand. If we look at schools open at about 7:30 in the morning, wind up by 2. Government offices, central government offices are 9, subordinate offices are 9:30. A little bit of staggering there. Markets tend to open later. So there is already a kind of a staggering that is there in Delhi. Maybe more could be done, but I think it's a good thing that there's a fair bit of staggering already happening in Delhi. Master plans. I'm not an urban planner. I frankly don't understand master plans too much. But what I have heard and have come across, there is a lot of rethinking on the utility of the master plans the way they exist today. Many people seem to feel that the master plan is not, there's no life in the master plan. It's only a plan of how a plot of land should be used or how different plots of land should be used. But somehow the whole thing about economic activity and growth of economic activity, and that sort of, the life is not there in that. So today, I think a lot of people are beginning to talk in terms of the utility of the master plans the way they are as of now. Can they be stronger documents which bring in a lot more of the economic challenges of the economic activity or the future growth of how economic activities would happen? I don't understand much about it to be able to talk greater length, but I think you're the right person to be able to get across to what needs to happen to master plans. I think it's a little outdated the way we are doing it today, but I think globally there are improved models that are being thought of in many cities. And to me, Singapore was an excellent example of how they had a 50-year concept plan, thought through 50 years ahead with mass transit corridors. There are many others. I've seen the Copenhagen, there's something called a finger plan for Copenhagen. There are many others which are well thought out documents. And I think there is a lot we can learn from that and improve our master planning process. We have covered most of the points.
Well, I think that was really wonderful. Thank you so much. I mean, so many questions have been put to you and you skillfully addressed all the questions. I can't resist but actually reinforce a comment that you made in response to subsidizing of these new radio camps. In fact, it's the other way around. The CCI, the Competition Commission of India, is actually investigating one of the companies for predatory pricing. So, I mean, there's excessive competition in this area. But thank you so much, Dr. Agarwal, for, I think, what was one of the best conversations that we've had. You answered all the questions. There were so many questions put to you. So really very nice to have you back in here and speak to this audience. And the fact that the audience has stayed well beyond dinner time, when you are not going to be served dinner by and you stayed well beyond dinner time, speaks volumes of the interest that you have generated. So thank you very much for being here. And let's